Like we said, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Christina Varner and I am with Higher Scores. We're going to be answering the most popular questions, your burning questions about test optional policies as they relate to college applications and the college admissions process. So I am here as a test prep professional who spends a lot of time doing research on how these test scores really affect students in the process of applications, how much of a difference it can make, especially since some of the changes that came along with the pandemic related to colleges' test policies and an increase in the test optional situation. And then because the information changes year by year, the pandemic has ended. There are schools who may be going back to test required, others that are sticking with test optional, and more announcing their choice or decision every day. I thought it would be really valuable for us to have Kat Klaus join us as a college admissions professional who does nothing but research these things, look up the data, and help students to navigate the admissions process with the most relevant information as their guide. So perhaps we should start by introducing ourselves. As I mentioned, my name is Christina Varner. I am the head of testing for Higher Scores Test Prep. I am coming from over 10 plus years teaching math in the local high school district. I taught everything from foundations, which comes before Algebra 1, to statistics, freshmen to seniors. I even taught a math class that was dedicated to a student's mindset and helping them overcome some of the math anxiety that can be very present in our students and interfere with their ability to perform. So I've taught it all when it comes to math in the classroom. I was also a part of the curriculum teams that they would put together over the summer. They would hand select instructors to work together and create lessons and assessments and units and curriculum maps for the district to use school by school. And all along the way, also doing subject-specific tutoring, especially when it comes to math-related subjects, and including SAT, ACT math tutoring in particular as well. I myself am a graduate 2 times over of our local Cal State Bakersfield. I have a Bachelor's of Science in Economics and a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics. I also held a single subject math teaching credential when I was in the classroom. Speaking of me in the classroom, I myself was an AP scholar in high school, and I still take these tests to this day. I will wake up early on a Saturday morning and go meet all of the teenagers in the parking lot waiting for admissions to that local high school where we sit down in a classroom for a good 4+ hours together and tackle the mental marathon that is the SAT and the ACT. Believe it or not, they do let grown-ups take it as long as it's during a less busy time in the season so that I'm not taking a spot from someone who really needs it for admissions purposes. And I do that just to make sure that the information that I'm sharing is still the most relevant, most efficient in terms of where the test is at currently, the way it's being given, and the content that it's covering. I'm going to let Kat introduce herself, but I can tell you this woman knows what she's talking about when it comes to the schools that you should target and what you should do to make sure your application shines when you apply. Kat, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, please?
Thanks, Christina. So I'm the CEO of March Consulting. I have over 12 years experience in college planning. I live and breathe like every single day of the year, college admissions. I love getting updates, looking at new colleges. I visit colleges, talk to admissions officers. I love following trends. And if you were here as we were chatting, I love the data part of it. I like diving into, the increase or decrease in applications and how competitive things are and what changes were made, especially in different fields like engineering, pre-med, pre-law, things like that. I started March Consulting because my family and I had no idea what we were doing when we were applying for college. And I will say we were applying for college because I leaned on my dad a lot just to go to all the college fairs and all the cool events and everything else like that. And we made so many mistakes. Oh my goodness. So I do have student loans. My goal is to help families avoid student loans and reduce college costs as much as possible, which has earned our students over 34 million in scholarships collectively, which is really exciting. It's, I love the acceptance, but I also like the scholarship offer. Like, how much do they give you, right? And then, can we ask for more money is always the next question. So I love matching students with colleges and keeping up with trends and really helping students find those opportunities that are going to help them grow where they can thrive. I also have a couple, big pieces of paper, very expensive pieces of paper under my belt. I have my bachelor's in communication from Santa Clara University and my MBA from Mount St. Mary's University in LA. I also have my post-grad certificate in educational consulting from UC Irvine. So I'm also an anteater technically, and I'm a professional member of the Independent Educational Consultants Association. So a lot of cool pieces of paper under my belt, but mostly what I love is helping families and demystifying this entire process. Because let me tell you, colleges are kind of a business and they are in it for themselves, even though they talk about being there for the students and everything else. When it comes down to it, they're for their own benefit. So helping students navigate that and knowing what choices to make with the information presented to them and finding that information can sometimes be really daunting. So that's just a little bit about me here at March Consulting.
And it's kind of neat because there are these three sort of core principles that Kat and I sort of bonded over when we first were interacting within this sphere of college admissions. And that's learning from our own mistakes and the desire to want to help students avoid those pitfalls in the current generation, and that idea of reducing college costs from the beginning, and how important that is, even for families that I work with who say, I'm ready to pay full price if my student gets into whatever dream school, and the kind of financial commitment that they're making. Just because you can doesn't always mean that you should. And we often are talking to families about return on investment in terms of what you pay for your college experience, what you can expect to earn as a starting salary upon graduation, and all those kinds of considerations. So when we talk about picking schools intentionally and the most common sense strategies for reducing college costs, we're both coming from that standpoint. Is you should be getting the best education, but also that puts you in the best situation in terms of various factors, including, but not limited to, finances. But we're here today to talk about the testing aspect in particular of college admissions, especially now that test optional is such a buzzword based on some changes that many schools made in response to the pandemic when it first started, and there were test site cancellations, and there were students who would be essentially at an unfair advantage or disadvantage because they weren't able to secure a test score in times to apply. However, we are now out of said pandemic, and schools are making decisions on how they're going to proceed moving forward. And as Kat mentioned, she spends a lot of time looking into these things. So I'd like if you would start, Kat, by helping us understand the differences in the options in the language, test optional versus any other kind of test policy. If you could kind of speak to that for a bit.
Of course. So this is where it starts to get really complicated. And each school before the pandemic, for the most part, would be universal. Everybody required test scores. You had to take an SAT or an ACT. Now, there were schools that were already test optional. You had the option of submitting a test score or not. And they were pretty clear on their policies, that they would look at the rest of your application without that testing piece on what's called a holistic basis, meaning that they're going to look at your grades, the classes that you took, they're going to look at the area you're from and the school you're from. Did you take advantage of the opportunities that were around you, your activities, your essays, your letters of recommendation, etc. And so you imagine this big pizza pie, right? And everything's kind of equal. They would just take that testing slice out, and then they would just slice the pizza differently, right? So everything would weigh a little bit more. And that was pretty universal until the pandemic, and then the table got flipped upside down. Now it is a school by school basis. Everybody's different. So one of the first things that I highly recommend that students do is you need to start planning your college list at the latest spring of junior year, because even a little bit earlier, actually, because you want to get testing over, right, Christina, right at the end of junior year. So you're not trying to do that at the end of, the beginning of senior year. So let's talk through what you're going to see in this verbiage and what it all means. Let's start with test required. This one's kind of easy. This means you have to have an SAT or ACT for admission. Point blank, you have to send your test scores. That's the end of it. Schools are returning to this. So the Georgia Public System, University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, they are test required. The Florida Public System, Florida State, University of Florida, they're test required. The military academies, West Point, the Naval Academy, are test required. Georgetown is also test required. University of Tennessee, Knoxville just came out to say they are test required again. And a couple other schools. So some colleges are returning. MIT has returned to test required. The next one is also very clear, and that's test blind. This means that the SAT or ACT is not required, and it's not considered at all in the admissions process, even if you submit them. A great example of this is the University of California system. They are test blind. Even if you tried to put an SAT or ACT in your application, they will black it out for admissions purposes. Now, you may have heard that somebody said somewhere that they had to submit an SAT or ACT score, and the reason that they may have had to is to qualify for admission. Maybe they didn't have a math credit they needed or a English credit that they needed. They can use test scores for that, but for admissions purposes, absolutely not. So test blind schools, the CSU system, the California State University system is also test blind now. They're not using them regardless. So you can't even submit them. Here's where it gets muddy. Test optional. SAT or ACT scores are optional for admissions. You can submit them if you want your test scores to be part of your application. You do not have to submit them in order to be considered for admission. And that's where I don't know, should I, right? So this would be Yale, Vanderbilt, and then I had to throw my alma mater in there. Santa Clara is also test optional right now, okay? So this is what we would advise, and we're gonna address another question a little bit later, is how do I know if my score is good enough? You would want to weigh for test optional schools, would your test score add to your application or earn you more in scholarships? We're going to talk about that in a moment as well. And then finally, and I think this is as muddy, if not muddier, is test flexible, where you can submit any test score to fulfill the requirement. NYU is a great example of this. They have been test optional before they were test flexible, but like the verbiage on their website, I'm going to show you some examples in a second, or a little, So you can submit an SAT or ACT score, AP scores, and they're specific about which AP scores, a PSAT score, a TOEFL score, IB scores, things like that. So let me show you a couple examples of how you'll see this on the website. UCLA will not consider SAT or ACT scores for admission or scholarship purposes through fall of 2024. Point blank. They will use them to determine eligibility for the California statewide admissions guaranteed as an alternate method of fulfilling minimum requirements. That's it. So like we said, the UCs are test blind. This is very clear. They do not use them for scholarships. They do not use them for admissions purposes. Okay, let's look at another example. NYU, this is where it goes, right? So they say that they've modified their testing requirements for the 2022-2023 application cycle for first year and transfer applicants, meaning that you can choose to send test scores or not. They also have their test flexible policy still. So you can submit an SAT or ACT score or 3 AP exams. And they want, it says a humanities exam, 1 for math or science, and 1 from an exam of your choice. Okay, so if you have 3 science APs, you would have to take a humanities AP at least to add in to qualify for text flexible here at NYU. You could send in international baccalaureate test or higher level exams. They have some other examples of international exams that you could submit as well. So you could submit a combination of any of these. And that's when it's a little bit like, what? Should I do that? Are my AP scores good enough? Should I submit them? Should I not submit them?
Let me interrupt for a moment, because as we answer the question, what does test optional mean? We might be creating more questions for you. And let me assure you, we're going to be addressing many of these questions. If you saw the registration invite in the first place, you know that we also allowed participants to let us know what their questions were in advance. So our presentation is designed around answering those questions that were submitted, the most common questions that come up. But any additional questions that come to mind as we're talking today, please feel free to use the chat, to use the Q&A options in our event software here, and let us know what comes to mind. But as Kat mentioned, some of these questions that we're bringing up now, we're going to talk about in more detail going forward. So hang in there. Let you know what we have in terms of the questions answered, and then let us know anything else that's on your mind at the end so that we can talk about it all. Okay, go ahead. Proceed, Kat.
Thank you. So we're going to, again, like Christina said, we're going to address this, but this is what students like yourselves are probably thinking, like, how do I know if my test score is good enough? How do I know if it's going to add to my application or subtract for it? What's that threshold, right? And it brings everything into question. Plus, we haven't addressed yet our test scores required for scholarship purposes. I want everyone to write this down. When you start looking at schools and generating your college list, I want you to ask the admissions office. Call them. They're very friendly. They're very nice. Call them and ask them, do they use test scores for scholarships? And if they do, what does that range look like, right? Could it hurt you? Could it help you? They will tell you straight up, and this may not be on the website. That's where it's a little sneaky, right? I'm going to show you another example, and I'm going to bring this into account right now. Okay, so there are some exceptions to the rules. This is a Baylor example. This is Baylor University in Texas. They do tell us that the decision to apply with or without test scores should be carefully thought through and considered. If you need to make a change, like let's say you take an SAT in August and then you decide you want to submit your score, but you've already maybe applied to Baylor and you've said you don't want to submit a score, you can make one change to that. Okay. So again, read through these policies for each school so that you know there are exceptions. And this is not very clear on websites. And for Baylor, applicants who are homeschooled, you will need to submit either the classic learning test, the SAT, or the ACT. And that's pretty standard actually for homeschool applicants. You will need to still submit a test even though you're test optional, you're applying to a test optional school. If you have attended a high school that use only narrative evaluations instead of grades, you will have to submit a test score. If you're graduating high school early, like I did, not to brag, but I did, you'll have to submit an SAT or ACT score. Okay, so there are exceptions to the rules. Even with specialty programs, you may be applying to a bachelor's of science with a medical doctorate, a BSMD program. And in that case, you're probably going to need to submit test scores. Okay, so major specific things can change this. So that's where you're going to want to research and plan ahead because you don't want to be surprised. And that's why I do advocate that students have a strong test score by the end of junior year, because it eliminates that if you decide at the last minute in October to apply to the school that you fell in love with, but they require a test. Now we have to fit that into senior year and studying for it, right? Now, another example of this is I actually called Baylor and I asked them, because it's not very clear on their scholarship website, it says that students who are applying test optional will still be considered for scholarships without a test score. But when I called them, they said, quote, and I'm going to get to this in a moment. Oh, no, I have that another slide. But they said basically, it won't hurt you, it will help you. And you should probably consider submitting a test score because it will help you, especially for their Getterman Scholars Program, which is a full ride scholarship. So just some things to keep in mind.
So I just want to reiterate, a student should research test policies for admissions to the school in general and test policies as they relate to school-specific scholarships or special programs that they might be offering. So 3 different ways that you want to check on the effect a test score can have on your application.
Another question that we got. Why would a school use a test optional policy? Who does it benefit the most? Well, the data tells us it benefits the schools the most because they had this huge increase in applications. And so their applicant pool just widened, which means that it's not like they added more chairs in their freshman class. It's the same amount of people. So their admissions rate goes down. And when that happens, their rankings go up, which means they get more applications. And it's just this endless cycle. I have a lot of opinions about the ranking system and the fact that ranking does not correlate with quality or value. But it 100% benefits the school the most. It does not really benefit the student at all. It makes everything far more stressful, a lot more muddy. Remember, colleges are businesses and they're out for their interests, not your interests. Now, they can be very helpful, but when it all comes down to it, USC had a 40% increase in applications this year for early action. And instead of outright denying students, they took everyone who wasn't admitted in that first round and put them in the regular decision pool. So now their acceptance rate this year is going to plummet, which means that their ranking goes up, which means that they're going to get more applications. And again, it's this endless cycle. So keep this in mind that even though it's TEPS optional, it benefits the school, not the student. Christina, maybe you can address this one. How do I know if my score is good enough to include in a test optional situation?
Right. So if you are thinking about this idea from the very jump, who would include a test score? Only a student who has a really strong one, right? If this can only help me, then I will only include information that's going to do the job of helping me stand out. Okay, but in truth, it's going to vary depending on the school, what's considered a good score. So a student needs to do a little bit of research in advance and find out a little bit about what the expectations are school by school. And sometimes you can find that out from the school's website, from their admissions tab, looking at requirements and details about what they're expecting in their applications. But Kat and I were talking about that data that we love, and there's a really great report that you can access that will tell you about last year's applicant pool. It will tell you data about the most recently admitted freshman class. And it will tell you of the students that they chose last year, what kind of scores they had. It will report a range, the middle 50%. So it'll tell us what that lower 25th percentile score was. It'll tell us what that upper 75th percentile was. And in terms of being competitive for some of those school-specific scholarships we mentioned, it's good to be in that 75th or above percentile when it comes to an individual school's range, because that's usually the kind of student that they might be offering merit aid to. A little cash incentive because this student has high metrics or high qualifications and they want to attract that talent. And especially for schools that don't have the reputation of Yale and Stanford and Brown, great programs, great opportunities, sometimes even better opportunities depending on what the student is looking for, but they're just not as well known. So how do they compete? How do they get the kind of quality student that would also be attracted to a Harvard and a Yale? And sometimes offering a certain amount of money in merit aid, reducing their college costs, is what clinches it for that school and lets them be the one that the student chooses. So looking at school-specific scholarships, they tend to be offered to students who are at that 75th percentile or above score. As a matter of fact, there's two ways to use this information in this report. If you're looking at a super selective lottery school like Stanford, where you can do everything right and still not get in just because of the numbers involved, it does help you see if you're in the ballpark, if you are a competitive candidate based on their very high score information. But the most strategic way to use this data is to target the schools where you are above their metrics, where you're ranking high compared to last year's applicant range. Because again, that makes you a very attractive candidate to that school. And that can open up opportunities in terms of scholarships, honors colleges, special programs alike. So do a little bit of research in advance. That report's called the Common Data Set, but there's lots of different places that you can go to get information about how generous schools are with those kinds of scholarships, the kinds of scores their applicants usually have. Some schools will even go so far as to tell you if they have a minimum requirement. Some of those specialty BSMD programs for pre-med students require a minimum ACT score of some kind. So there's lots of different ways for you to look into how test scores will affect you at an individual school. And sometimes that data, like in the Common Data Set, can be a very helpful way to see what they accepted last year, see how you compare, and if adding that information to your application just gives value to what you've already put together, or if maybe it sort of distracts from all the other great things that you're highlighting about yourself in your application. Kat, I'm going to throw this to you because of all of the research that you have done about admissions. Am I more likely to be admitted, or am I more likely to get a scholarship if I do include my scores when it's optional?
Ooh, I'm going to pull out an industry term that everybody hates, and that's it depends. It depends on the school and it depends on the student. From what I've seen, however, I'm going to show you some examples. If a student has a strong score, hands down submit it because it can only help you. So let me clarify this with some examples. Okay, so this is for last year. We did see a little bit of data for certain schools, not all schools. So I don't want everybody to go back and say Kat Klaus said that all schools are. No, just some schools. There was an advantage for submitting a test score. Now, I will also qualify this data by saying most of the people who did submit scores, their scores were really high. So we don't have that normalization anymore, right? So when you look at that data, those are the students who did accept or did submit test scores. So we can see for University of Pennsylvania, Vanderbilt, Tufts, and University of Virginia, the students who were accepted, for the most part, had strong test scores and submitted them. That makes it a little bit more difficult because, again, the students who submitted scores had strong scores. And the students who did not submit scores, we don't know if they had strong scores or not. They just didn't submit them. So what the schools did is they looked at everything else a little bit more closely, right? And that may or may not have affected their decision. when you get a lot of very highly qualified students, your test scores can be an asset to your profile. Remember I said I called Baylor earlier this morning just to verify, right? I have a quote in a moment that's going to, I'm not going to spoil it. I get so excited about all of our data. Okay, let me show you another. Here's our Baylor example, okay? So Baylor is test optional, except if you're, remember, homeschooled, graduated high school early, or have a different type of curriculum at your high school. On the admission side, test optional. Their Getterman Scholars Award, it's a $60,000 a year award. It's $240,000 total. It's basically a full ride. This covers tuition, fees, room and board, support for study abroad, research, and mission service experiences. Now, they say the Getterman Scholars Award is test optional. However, they also say historically, those who receive the award have scored a 1,500 or above on the SAT or a 34 or above on the ACT. So what I did is I called Baylor and I asked them, for the competitiveness of that scholarship specifically, is there an advantage for a student to submit a test score? And this is what they said. They said, it is a very competitive program. We will look at everything. A student can add to their profile with a test score, and it can actually automatically consider them for the Getterman Scholars Award with that test score. If you don't submit a test score, you may need to apply for the program, and then we consider everything. So that automatic verification, he said, can sometimes give you a little bit of a bump because they have something to quantify everything with. Then I asked, all right, are our students at a disadvantage? And they said, we recommend that students build their profile as much as possible to stand out in the admissions process. While test scores aren't the first thing we look at, we do treat them as a consideration to help students in the admissions process, to help them, not to hinder them. But, and I know they don't do this, they don't compare students like neck and neck. I know a lot of students think that, right? That like, oh, well, if somebody else at my school has a 4.5 and I have a 4.5, like, what are, but if you have that high test score, and we can kind of see with the ACT, like the reading and your science score and your math and everything else, or with your SAT, right? It just helps you. It gives you that little extra piece. So I would say that for certain schools and certain programs, yes, it does help your admissibility and it does help your scholarship consideration because of the fact that it's an added bonus to your application. It builds your profile.
And I'd like to highlight what really stood out for me in that response. It will automatically qualify some students for consideration. So just having included a good test score, you're going to be considered for money that you might not have been, because without a test score, you might have to submit a separate application, do additional work to be considered for that. And I really am comforted by the idea that including a solid test score will make sure that a student is considered for all avenues of merit aid, of college cost funding, and automatic is a great word to hear when it comes to scholarship consideration.
The automatic is key because we know that students, they have other stuff to do, especially senior year, right? And while it can be really beneficial doing all those applications, it's also a lot of time. So anything that automatic comes your way, and I would add too, that if you are looking at colleges, which you should be, right, and you're building your list, I want you to ask admissions, are there any specialty programs or scholarships where test scores would be an advantage or automatically consider me, right? That's a really important question, because if not, and we're going to address a question that's like, well, do I need to do this or not, right? Maybe all the schools that you're looking at, it's not to an advantage. So for that, you wouldn't have to go through that process, and straight from admissions, right? We always want to get information from the horse's mouth, right? Not from all these other venues online, right? So that's a really important consideration, and it can help you make your decision. But automatic, Not gonna lie, that's really nice. And now when I'm doing my notes, these are questions that I ask as a professional to colleges. For testing students, are there extra scholarships available or different tiers? And let's talk about those tiers too, because that's a big thing. So I'm going to give you another example. Automatic, West Virginia University, test optional, class of 2022. They'll offer merit scholarships to test optional admits provided they meet certain GPA benchmarks. However, and they're pretty clear on this, which I congratulate West Virginia on, students are encouraged to submit a test score to be considered for maximum scholarship eligibility. If you go on their website and look at these scholarship amounts, you'll see that with a test score, it's like a $10,000 to $14,000 difference if you're out of state. Automatic, just with a test score. That's well, maybe not a small car now, but yeah, it's a 3/4 of a small starter car, right? A year. So this is really important. You want to do your research, and part of the college cost piece is doing this before you spend all the time applying. Ooh, don't do what my family did, which we applied and hoped for the best. And then I got all my scholarship awards back and realized I couldn't go to a majority of the schools I've been admitted to. Ooh, you talk about that's rough, ugly tears, right? This is part of this process is you want to go in depth into this research. You want to see not only do I need to test, but what extras are out there if I do test, and how do I formulate my college list accordingly. Okay, so merit aid, couple more examples. I like examples, For test optional, they will only go off your GPA. And there's some school to school differences in what that GPA is. Is it your core GPA with only your core classes, or is it your full GPA? Is it weighted or unweighted? Usually it's unweighted. University of Arizona has an amazing scholarship program for in-state and out-of-state students, but they only take your core unweighted GPA for that. So you really want to look for that as well. However, if you add that test score in, usually, again, for some schools, it can graduate you. For a lot of schools, it can graduate up to a different scholarship tier. I also want to say that with a GPA and really strong test scores, you want to aim, just like Christina said, for those schools where you're in that top percentage, and apply for any scholarship programs that require additional application or essays, because that's also for extra money. Test scores can help you stand out from the crowd. Also, don't rule out private schools when you see their sticker price. I remember when we were looking at colleges, I almost fell out of my chair when I saw how much my alma mater was. But they were the one that gave me the biggest scholarship because, just like Christina said, they wanted to lure me away from the Boston Universities of the world and the Stanfords of the world, right? So they gave me the biggest scholarship to get me there at that school. And usually they're a lot more generous than some of the big names. So keep that in mind. But again, your test scores can help. So, all right. Let's look at the University of Alabama. And I know that Christina, you have really helped students improve their points, but I wanted to also put in an example here where you don't have to have a perfect GPA or a perfect ACT or a perfect SAT, right? So for out-of-state freshman automatic merit scholarships for University of Alabama, if you have a 3.5 GPA and a 26 on the ACT, if you improve your score 1 point, that's $8,000 a year more. That's great. And improve it 1 more point, it's $10,000 a year. Another small car, right? And Christina, you have a lot of success with this in improving those starting scores. Can you talk a little bit more about that with students?
Yeah, this is actually one of the questions that was submitted in advance as well. I'm coming from a low starting score. So this is a student who maybe took a practice test or has taken the test previously on record, and their scores have come in and they feel like their scores are low to the extent that maybe they shouldn't even bother, especially in test optional times. Maybe they should just count on not including that. But the example that we're looking at here, the example we saw at West Virginia, they all showed us that there are tiered systems where a single point can make a big difference. And our ACT Quick Prep, SAT Quick Prep program is designed to help boost a student's score like that, maybe help them enter that next tier in a minimal amount of time in terms of preparation, because Quick Prep is really designed for students who are going to be taking that test in a matter of weeks, maybe for students who are looking for test taking strategies, best practices, more information about what to expect, so that they are in the right place to perform on test day. And this Quick Prep program, in as little as 4 hours, has improved students' scores. So it can make a big difference, just a single point on the ACT. And so whether you're starting from a low score and you're looking at a goal score that's related to one of these tier systems, maybe you're just looking to pull your score up a couple of points. There are some ratios out there. If you Google, how much time do I need to study to pull my SAT score up a certain amount of points? And it will tell you somewhere around 80 hours to see a 200-point difference. So depending on where you're at test-wise now and what your goal score is, that can help you get a good sense of how much time you should expect to put in to get the results that you're looking for. But you won't know what your goal score is until you have identified the right schools for you and you've looked into their expectations. And you'd be surprised how often those expectations are not a 36 or a 1600 or a 4.9 GPA. There are lots of opportunities out there for students who have their best personal score on record by the end of their junior year, even if it's not a perfect score, that can make a big difference with merit aid, qualifying for special programs, and admissions in general. Sometimes that little tweak in your score, and I'm going to tell you a secret, that certainly comes from finding some of those concepts that you've always struggled with and putting in the time to master them, especially specific to how they're going to show up on a standardized test. But it also comes from targeting your strengths as well. Sometimes just that last little bit of connection, that last little bit of understanding when it comes to something that you've naturally taken to. Maybe you love logarithms. That last little concept that you can add to your arsenal of understanding can make that difference. So it doesn't have to be 3 months of intensive test prep, although that's not a bad way to go about it. And we have packages for both that I'm going to talk more about. But test prep in general can be extremely valuable. Whether you've got a lot of time or a little bit of time, there are things that you can do, both in terms of academic content and understanding and improving in that area, but also in terms of getting comfortable with the test experience, getting comfortable with the timing and the rhythm of the test, knowing what directions are going to be on there, knowing what formulas they're going to provide you as a reference for the math sections, knowing when you can and can't use a calculator, just putting yourself in a position where you have enough experience and understanding of the test itself can do wonders for your performance on test day. So there's different approaches to test prep that you can pursue, some more extensive than others, some more academically centered than others, but it all works because this is not a magic test that measures your intelligence or your abilities. It just shows how much time you had to put into mastering this particular test's approach to the concepts covered. So putting in some work in preparation of your test, even if it's a 1 point difference or more, can have a huge effect on the outcome in terms of your admissions, your opportunities, and your scholarship benefits.
I would add to that,
So I
Christina.
think please.
I was going to just add to that and say that I've never had a student who had a solid test score and spent that time regret that they had taken that test. Because inevitably in the admissions process, they will maybe add a college or a program or get invited to something, right? The honors programs at universities are amazing. And this is where, again, your test score can help you stand out a little bit, qualify you for more scholarships in the honors program, but those special opportunities. And when that happens, I've had students who have a scramble to get that test score, and it is extremely stressful. You're trying to like squeeze that test score into senior year during midterms and homecoming and all the fun stuff that you want to do, right? And so having that test score by the end of junior year, that solid test score, is really important, even if you don't use it. Let's say that you decide that you're applying to all UCs and CSUs and they're all test blind. There was a possibility that you may have gotten an invitation to ASU, and you went there and you fell in love with it, and then you want to be part of the Barrett Honors College or to University of Tennessee, Knoxville, or something like that, right? So again, I agree with Christina. It's all about starting your college list early and knowing.
And we say aim for a solid test score by the end of your junior year so that you do have that grace period if you do suddenly become aware of a requirement somewhere in your schools or the opportunities there you weren't aware of. But even then, it's so stressful for the student because at the start of the school year, they're going to have both juniors who are planning ahead and seniors who are looking for last minute results, all competing for a limited number of test spots during those test dates. Sometimes students cannot get a seat for the test date that they planned by the time they were aware that they wanted to attend. And there are schools who have special programs that are tied to applying early. If you want to be considered, you have to apply during their early action round. And for them, that means you're supposed to be submitting everything related to the application by that due date. There are schools that will let you apply and then send your scores a few months after when you've had the opportunity to get them in and get that worked out. But there are some that are cut and dry about including everything that you're going to for your application by this early due date. And that puts even more pressure on those August, September, October tests because students are trying to get what they need before a pending due date. So the sooner you can start both your school research, your test prep, your test attempts, it often takes the student more than one try. So a junior may want to start earlier in the year so that their second attempt later is coming from a more informed place. But sooner is always better when it comes to the kind of planning that's involved here.
I completely agree. It's all about planning. That's what lowers all of the stress. Now, Christina, you have, I know different test prep packages and things like that. And I want to say that you have some sort of special offer. Am I wrong on that?
You're not wrong. I do have a special offer for those of you who are spending this time with us, if that's currently live or watching the replay. I do want to offer a 10% discount on all of our higher scores package options. And that's going to include the quick prep that I referenced earlier and our complete prep. And I'm going to go into more detail about both of these things. But knowing that you're going to be testing means that you know you're going to be spending some time preparing. And our packages are designed to give you time to work on your test prep, to prep for your test dates that you land on. For example, our complete package which includes all of the academic content as well as those test-taking strategies. That complete package is made accessible to students for an entire year upon purchase. When they begin working with the system, they can access it for the full year. And that is so that students can take multiple attempts. That's so that students can stretch out and plan their test prep in a way that works with their schedule. When we're talking about planning for test prep, we tell students not just to focus on test dates, but to remember their own personal calendar. If there is a spring musical that keeps them really busy, if marching band is really demanding in the fall, maybe we plan around those with our multiple test dates, and that can mean spanning it out throughout the course of the year. So there are ways that a student can use complete prep leading up to their first test, or even as a halfway point throughout the program, as the student is given a study guide that they are encouraged at the very beginning to map out throughout their test prep planning period. So whatever package is ideal for you, your student, and your test plan, we're offering 10% off using our offer code, optional10. And again, that's going to work for either package. If you've got 2 to 5 weeks before your test date, if you feel pretty confident in your understanding of the concepts covered in the verbal sections, in the math section, including the science section for the ACT, if you feel like it's more the test day and your ability to take that test under the time constraints, and you're looking for strategies, approaches that will help you perform your best, especially in a shorter amount of time, Quick Prep is a great option. It's going to talk to you about how to approach the test. It's going to give you all the ins and outs of what to expect and what the test entails, what concepts are covered, where they're pulling their passages from. It's going to give you all the insider scoop. It's also going to have you take a practice test and analyze it in terms of your strengths and weaknesses so that you can target some of those concepts that would be the most beneficial for you in advance of that pending exam date. But if you are planning in advance enough that you have 6 to even 12 weeks to prepare prior to your test, the complete package is a great option because in addition to all of that test-taking advice, like I said, it covers the academic concepts as well. So there are video courses, lessons about the math concepts to expect, about the English, the reading, and even advice about the science subjects that are covered. The video lessons, the practice assignments are things that students can plan around their own schedule, work on in their own time. Our complete package is pretty comprehensive, meaning it often answers the main questions that come up through use along the way. But any questions that a student is left with, they can still get guidance from our tutors through our system. They can ask questions about specific problems they're working on. They can ask questions about the video they're watching. They can tell us a timestamp for what portion of the video they need help with. And our tutors will respond promptly with text responses or even video when it's appropriate. I know sometimes when explaining math concepts, it just becomes easier to talk about it and maybe use my hands to reference. But students are supported. It is meant to be used independently around their schedule, but students are supported all along the way. We're helping to answer questions. We're helping to cheer them on. We're helping to encourage them and give them the confidence that has proven to make a difference in their score on test day. So I would encourage you to check out our website if you'd like more information, more detail about what these courses entail and which would be best for your student. Maybe you're unsure which test is best for your student. We've got some advice about which version of standardized test, ACT or SAT, might be ideal for your student based on certain factors. We've got advice about when you might be planning your test prep, your test dates, and that comes down to factors including what math class your student is currently in, and if they have been exposed to all of those math concepts that are going to come up on either test. So lots of great free advice, including the ability to sign up for our Insider's Guide, which gives you 35 amazing strategies that are helpful for both the ACT and the SAT. You can also interact with us through our website. You can reach out, ask a question, ask for some advice on whatever it is you're trying to figure out in terms of testing and your students' test progress. So feel free to go to our website and reach out. I love chatting with people. I love sharing the information that I have for free because there's so much to know and understand about test prep, about the college admissions industry, that it's never enough. Whatever we have shared, there's always more that we could offer. So please don't hesitate to check out the website, to reach out. You can email us, you can call us, whatever is most convenient for you. But you might have heard a lot in our responses today in these main questions about how much it depends. It depends on the school. It depends on the policy. It depends on if we're talking about admissions or a special program. And not only that, it depends on the student. It depends on their individual wants and needs and what's best for them. So it's really beneficial to spend some time talking with a professional, because your student situation is unique and you will want advice that's tailored to what it is they're looking for, where they're trying to go, and how to get there appropriately. So please don't hesitate. Let us know if you have questions. Give us a phone call. Tell us what you're thinking about. Tell us what you're wondering about. Maybe it's what you're most worried about, and we're happy to chat and see how we can help. Kat, do you have any last words for our attendees?
I would say thank you so much for joining us. If you have additional questions, please put them in the chat. I did want to point out that once you're a Higher Scores test prep client, there are some discounts that March Consulting gives to Higher Scores test prep clients. So what we do is we really suggest that college list and schools that fit the student and all their goals and needs. Love teaching each student the process. So it's not just about, handing people fishes, as I say. We don't want to chuck fishes at you. We want to teach you how to fish, to use an old story, right? If you have any questions about the admissions process, let us know. You can email us. You can visit our website. Lots of free resources there, and you can call us. It looks like Anne has.
We have a great question.
I was going to say, yeah, we have a question. Have heard that several colleges ask students applying test optional to explain why. Now that there are more test centers open, what else could there be besides getting a low score? Could applying test optional seem lazy too? This is touchy. And I will say, again, colleges are in it for themselves. I hate this question. I think this is a lazy question on behalf of the colleges. Why are you applying test optional? My best advice, if you're applying to a school and you do not have that score that you wanted for that school, and you have to answer this question, is to instead turn it around and say, maybe there wasn't a test center open, or maybe there's some logistical reasons. You can list those. If you don't have the test score you want, they ask this question, I would highly recommend that you say that you believe that your academics, your activities, and your recommendations are a better representation of you as a student than the test itself, and leave it at that. You don't have to go seriously in depth. You could highlight some of the activities or some of the things that you've done or academically gone above and beyond in, even some special awards that you've won or things like that. But I would just turn that around on them a little bit. Honestly, I don't think that this question is a fair question. And I think I know what school you're talking about when you're suggesting this question. I know exactly what school asked this question, and I'm not a fan of it. But just turn it around. If there are logistical reasons, list them. If you did not submit that test score and you need to list why, just tell them that you feel like other pieces of your application are a better indicator of your abilities and how you would fit in at that school. Other questions? I don't see anything. You're very welcome, Anne. Well, thank you so much for having me on, Christina. I really love talking about everything higher scores and
Thank you for
March
joining
consulting and
us.
college admissions. So, one more. We say 26 versus 27 ACT can make a difference in scholarships. Does it mean that super score 26 or 27 or just a one-day score? Ooh, that's a really good question. That's in the fine print under the Alabama chart. And off the top of my head, I cannot remember if they super score or not. So I would say that you would need to go onto Alabama's website and just read the fine print because it'll tell you. If they do not, ask the admissions office. Do you super scores? Does that factor in? And they'll tell you straight up because sometimes it changes as well. So you want to get the most up-to-date information that you can.
Yeah, this is another factor that's going to depend school by school, if they allow super scores or not. So unfortunately, it is the kind of thing that we have to say, go to the source, find out what they have to say. And if it's not apparent on their website, do feel free to give them a phone call and ask for those kinds of details because it varies institution by institution.
Thank you guys so much. This is great. This is fun. We got to do this again sometime.
Yeah.
Everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you.